The night was colder than she remembered. Not the kind of cold that bit through coats or turned breath into mist, but the kind that started in the bones, the kind you felt when you were walking back into a place you swore you'd never step foot in again. Samantha Price stood at the wrought iron gates of the house that used to be hers. Once, she had walked through them with keys in her pocket, groceries in her arms, and dreams spilling out of her smile. Now, she carried only one thing, a crisp manila folder in her leather handbag, its contents capable of tearing down the smug little kingdom her ex-husband had built inside these walls. She rested a hand on her belly, feeling the faint kick of the life growing inside her. 6 months pregnant, alone, and about to walk into a scene she could already picture, because she had been told exactly what was waiting for her. The call had come earlier that day from her old neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly. The older woman's voice was tight, laced with outrage. "Samantha, honey, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but he's there, and she's there, in your old house. They've got music going, lights on in every room, laughing like they own the place." Her ex-husband, Michael Price, had many flaws, but subtlety wasn't one of them. If he wanted to flaunt his new mistress, Chloe, in the home Samantha had helped design, renovate, and love into existence, he would do it with every light blazing. At first, Samantha felt the familiar wave of hurt, the sharp sting of betrayal she'd been nursing since the divorce papers were signed. But it didn't last. The pain was quickly replaced by a calm, icy focus. She'd been waiting for this moment. Because while Michael thought he had won, taking the house, the furniture, and the life they'd built, he had no idea that his grip on it was already slipping. She looked at the towering facade beyond the gates, the white columns, the wraparound porch, the French windows glowing warm against the night. Every brick, every pane, every blade of grass on the manicured lawn, it was hers again. Not because she wanted it, but because she could take it, and she would. The eviction papers in her bag were signed, sealed, and legally bulletproof. Michael had defaulted on several clauses in the property settlement, clauses he had smugly dismissed when their lawyers argued them in court. Now those clauses were the noose tightening around his perfect little neck. Samantha pushed the gate open. The metal hinges creaked, a sound she remembered from late-night returns after date nights, back when she still believed in him. She walked up the stone path slowly, each step deliberate. The evening air was still except for the faint hum of bass from inside. Through the large bay window, she saw them. Michael, in a navy suit jacket, no tie, hair perfectly styled like he'd just stepped out of a magazine spread. Chloe, wearing a silk slip dress in a dangerous shade of red, perched on the arm of his leather chair. Her laugh was too loud, her hand too familiar on Michael's chest. There were other people there too, Michael's business associates, by the look of their tailored suits and designer watches. Glasses of champagne sparkled in their hands. The living room looked staged for a lifestyle ad. Crystal decanters on the bar, fresh flowers in vases. Samantha had picked out years ago, the Persian rug they'd bought together in Italy. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She could feel her heart pounding, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. A memory flashed, unbidden. Michael standing in that same room 2 years ago, smiling at her like she was the only person in the world. "This is our forever home," he'd said, his arm around her waist. Forever had lasted exactly 8 months before she caught him in an affair with a marketing assistant from his company. She'd walked out with nothing but her clothes, her car, and a vow to never let him see her broken. And here she was, not broken, not begging, but ready to end the charade he was playing. She climbed the porch steps, her heels clicking against the wood. The door, painted the same deep green she had chosen, stood tall and smug. She didn't knock. She turned the handle and walked in. The music hit her first, a low, sultry jazz track coming from the hidden speakers Michael had installed. Then came the voices, laughter, the faint clink of glass. The warmth of the house wrapped around her, bringing with it the ghost of 100 memories. The room went silent the moment she stepped in. Michael froze mid-sentence, his smile faltering as he turned toward her. His eyes flicked instinctively to her belly, then to her face. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Chloe's expression twisted into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Wow," she drawled, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. Didn't expect to see you here. Is this a social call? Samantha didn't answer. She took her time walking across the room, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes on her. The sound of her heels on the hardwood echoed in the tense air. When she reached the center of the room, she set her bag down on the coffee table, right next to the champagne bottle, and pulled out the manila folder. "I won't take up much of your evening," she said, her voice calm, even. "I'm here on business." She held out the papers to Michael. He didn't take them at first, just stared at her like she'd sprouted wings. "What is this?" he finally asked, his voice low. Samantha's lips curved into a slow, measured smile. "It's notice of eviction, effective immediately." The room seemed to shrink. Someone coughed. Chloe shifted uncomfortably but tried to keep her composure. Michael laughed, but it was hollow, strained. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," Samantha said, her gaze steady. "You should probably start packing tonight. The locks change in 72 hours. A ripple of murmurs went through the group. Samantha didn't wait for Michael's response. She turned to leave, her head high, the eviction notice still dangling in his hand. As she reached the door, she paused and glanced over her shoulder. "Enjoy your evening," she said, her voice like ice. "It's your last one here." And then she stepped out into the night, the cold air filling her lungs like victory. 6 months earlier, Samantha Price's life had looked nothing like it did now. Back then, she still believed she was living the dream she'd spent her 20s chasing, the dream of stability, a family, and a place to finally call home. She was 32, with warm hazel eyes and an easy smile that made people feel comfortable around her. Friends described her as the kind of person who remembers your coffee order forever, the one who sent thank you notes for even the smallest kindness. She wasn't flashy, never the loudest in the room, but she was dependable, loyal to the bone. Before Michael, Samantha had been a junior interior designer at a mid-sized firm in the city. She'd worked her way up from the receptionist's desk, teaching herself drafting software at night after long days answering phones. Her talent for turning ordinary spaces into warm, inviting havens had earned her a solid reputation among clients who valued comfort over showiness. It was at one of those client meetings in a newly purchased penthouse apartment that she met Michael Price. He was 37 then, a rising real estate developer with sharp suits, sharper cheekbones, and a smile that seemed tailor-made for magazine covers. He was confident in a way that made you believe he could handle anything. From the beginning, he treated her like she was extraordinary. He remembered little details from their conversations, sent flowers just because, and told her she was the only woman who saw him for who he really was. Coming from a childhood where affection had been scarce and stability even scarcer, Samantha soaked it in like sunlight after a long winter. They married 2 years later in a small vineyard ceremony. She wore a lace gown she'd found on sale, and he wore a custom-tailored suit. They laughed under strings of twinkling lights, promising to love each other through whatever life threw at them. When they found the colonial-style house with its white columns and wraparound porch, it felt like the final piece of their fairy tale. Samantha poured herself into making that house a home. She refinished furniture by hand, planted a rose garden, and painted the nursery before there was even talk of a baby. Michael encouraged it at first, bragging to his friends about her amazing design eye. But over time, his praise turned into mild disinterest, then into the kind of dismissive nod you give someone who's talking about something you don't care about. Still, she believed they were happy. She believed the late nights at the office were just part of his growing business, that the unexplained business trips were exactly what he said they were. She believed it right up until the night she found the first clue. It was a lipstick stain on one of his dress shirts. Not her shade, not her brand. When she asked, he laughed it off, said it must have been from leaning too close to a client at a crowded networking event. She wanted to believe him, so she did. The second clue came weeks later, a perfume scent on his jacket that didn't belong to her. This time, he rolled his eyes, called her paranoid, and reminded her that jealousy wasn't attractive. She swallowed her doubts, told herself she was imagining things. Then came the third clue, and there was no mistaking it. She had stopped by his office to surprise him with lunch, only to find the door locked and the blinds drawn. She knocked, and after a long moment, he emerged looking flustered, shirt untucked, hair mussed. Behind him, a young woman with glossy black hair adjusted her skirt and avoided Samantha's eyes. Michael had brushed past her without explanation, muttering something about urgent business. That night, he didn't come home until after midnight. From that moment, something inside Samantha shifted. She didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't beg for an explanation. Instead, she began quietly documenting everything. Every suspicious text, every unexplained charge on the credit card, every night he didn't come home. She called an attorney. She learned her rights, and she began to see Michael for who he truly was. A man who thought he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. It was during this time that she discovered she was pregnant. When the test turned positive, Samantha sat on the cool edge of the bathtub, staring at the little pink lines. She felt a rush of joy, fear, and determination all at once. This baby was hers, a piece of her she would protect at all costs. Michael's involvement was secondary. She told him over dinner a week later. For a moment, his eyes lit up, the way they had when they were first dating. But the glow faded quickly, replaced by a tight smile and a muttered, "That's great, Sam." From then on, he became even more distant. He missed doctor's appointments, didn't ask about her health, and seemed irritated whenever she mentioned the baby. By the time the divorce papers were filed, she knew she would be raising her child largely on her own. The settlement had given him temporary rights to the house, a detail that had stung deeply. But Samantha's attorney had insisted on adding clauses to the agreement. Clauses Michael clearly hadn't bothered to read carefully. The clauses were simple. The property must remain in good repair, mortgage payments must be made on time, and the home could not be used for business or events without Samantha's written permission. Within months, Michael had violated all three. He'd rented out the space for parties, let the landscaping go wild, and fallen behind on payments in favor of funding lavish weekends with Chloe. Samantha's attorney had called her 2 weeks ago with the news. "If you want the house back, now's your chance. You're completely within your rights to evict him." For days, she debated it. She didn't want the house because she still loved it. She wanted it because it was hers, because he had taken it without respect or gratitude, and because she was done letting him believe there were no consequences for his actions. Now, standing in front of the mirror in her small rental apartment, Samantha had studied herself before leaving for the confrontation. Her pregnancy glow softened the sharpness in her cheeks, but her eyes were different. Clearer, harder. She wore a fitted black dress under a camel coat, low heels that clicked like punctuation marks on pavement, and a scarf her grandmother had given her. In her bag were the eviction papers, notarized and ready. She looked herself in the eye and whispered, "You're not the same woman who walked away with nothing." The baby kicked, almost as if in agreement. That was the woman who had walked up to the gates of the house that night, ready to deliver not just a legal notice, but a message. She was done playing the victim. And as much as Michael thought this was about property, Samantha knew it was about something bigger. Reclaiming her dignity, one signed document at a time. The Price house sat like a jewel on the edge of the cul-de-sac, its wraparound porch spilling warm light onto the manicured lawn. From the outside, nothing hinted at the decay within. The columns were freshly painted, the hedges trimmed, the front steps swept clean. It was the kind of picture-perfect home you might see on the cover of a luxury real estate magazine. But Samantha knew better. She'd walked those hallways barefoot at midnight, fixing a leaky faucet while Michael slept in. She'd scrubbed wine stains from that porch after their first summer party. She'd tended the roses out front, not a landscaping crew. Every polished surface had once been touched by her hands. Tonight, the place looked alive in a way that felt wrong. Too loud, too crowded. Michael had thrown a small gathering, though small in his vocabulary meant 30 people with expensive clothes and shallow smiles. Cars lined the driveway and spilled onto the street, sleek imports and glossy SUVs that screamed money. From the moment Samantha stepped inside, the house greeted her with a wave of sound and scent. Jazz spilled from hidden speakers, mingling with bursts of laughter and the faint pop of champagne corks. The air carried the rich aroma of catered hors d'oeuvres, truffle canapés, bacon-wrapped scallops, imported cheese. The foyer was just as she remembered. Sweeping staircase, polished hardwood, a crystal chandelier, Michael had once insisted, was worth every cent. But the little touches that had made it a home were gone. No family photos on the console, no basket for shoes by the door. The Persian rug she'd loved was replaced by a sleeker, colder runner. It felt like a showroom, not a sanctuary. She could see into the living room from the foyer. The oversized leather sectional, one of the few pieces of furniture she'd agreed to leave behind, was pushed against the wall to make space for clusters of guests. Michael stood near the fireplace, holding court as if he were the star of some glossy lifestyle spread. Chloe, in that scarlet slip dress, hovered beside him, touching his arm when she laughed at his jokes. On the coffee table sat a champagne tower, tiered crystal glasses waiting for the next dramatic pour. Behind it, the bar gleamed under recessed lighting, stocked with bottles so expensive the labels alone could pay a month's rent. It was a deliberate display of status meant to impress the people in this room. But Samantha knew how much of it was smoke and mirrors. She knew the mortgage was behind. She knew the landscaping service had been canceled for months before he hired someone for this event. She knew the credit card balances were so high that just one missed payment could send the whole facade crumbling. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood as she stepped further in. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Michael's eyes found her instantly. For a heartbeat, something like panic flickered there, quickly replaced by a practiced smile. "Samantha?" he said, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear, as if her presence were merely unexpected, not unwelcome. "What a surprise." Chloe tilted her head, lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, how quaint," she said, looking Samantha up and down. "Didn't think this was your kind of crowd anymore." Samantha didn't answer right away. Instead, she let her gaze travel the room, the guests, the decor, the way people shifted uncomfortably in the silence. She could feel the power tilting just a little as eyes moved from Michael to her, curious and cautious. The dining room, beyond the living space, was set for 12. The table draped in white linen and set with gold-rimmed china. The centerpiece was a tall arrangement of white orchids, Samantha's favorite, though she doubted Michael even remembered that. The kitchen, visible through the archway, was a flurry of motion as caterers plated desserts under the glare of pendant lights. Everywhere she looked, the house was trying to scream success, but to her, it whispered desperation. She stepped into the living room fully now, shrugging off her coat. The black dress hugged her figure, her pregnancy obvious but carried with quiet dignity. A few of the women in the room exchanged glances, whispering behind champagne flutes. Samantha didn't care. "This is a private event," Michael said, his voice even but tight. Samantha arched a brow. "In my house?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Michael's jaw tightened. "It's not your house anymore." Her lips curved just slightly, a smile without warmth. "We'll see about that." Before he could respond, she glanced toward the staircase. Even from here, she could see the faint shadow line where the wall had been repainted, the result of Chloe's decision to remove the gallery wall of photos Samantha had curated over years. The little nicks in the banister were still there too, from when Michael had insisted on moving a sofa upstairs without professional help. They were tiny scars in the wood, but to Samantha they were memories. Her attention moved back to the guests. Some were watching with thinly veiled fascination, others pretending to sip their drinks. In the corner, a man in a gray suit she recognized as one of Michael's investors was whispering to the woman beside him. Samantha could guess the conversation. "Who is she? Why is she here?" Michael's voice cut through her thoughts. "If you've come to make a scene, Samantha, don't. This is business." She laughed, a quiet, humorless sound. "You don't want a scene, Michael? Then maybe you shouldn't have moved your mistress into my living room." Chloe stiffened, but her smirk didn't quite disappear. "We were just enjoying a lovely evening until you barged in," she said. "Lovely evenings have a way of ending," Samantha replied, her tone still calm. From the kitchen, a caterer emerged with a tray of petit fours, clearly unsure whether to set them down or retreat. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. Samantha took a slow step toward the coffee table, her gaze sweeping the champagne tower, the crystal bowls of caviar, the strategically placed magazines featuring Michael's company. Every detail was curated for image, just like Michael himself. And yet, beneath the gleam and glitter, Samantha could feel the cracks, the missed mortgage payments, the legal violations, the arrogance that blinded him to the fact that she could still touch this house with a single piece of paper. She didn't pull it out yet. That would come later. For now, she let the silence stretch, the walls of the house holding its breath, along with everyone inside. This was still the home she'd built, and tonight she was going to remind Michael of that in the most public way possible. Michael Price had always been a man who thrived on admiration. Even before the money, before the tailored suits in the corner office, he'd possessed a knack for charming people into giving him what he wanted. In his 20s, it was free drinks, skipped lines, and favors from friends who believed in his big plans. In his 30s, those plans had materialized, not through genius alone, but through a relentless willingness to cut corners, step over competitors, and reinvent the truth when it suited him. To the crowd gathered tonight, Michael was the perfect host. He moved between groups with a practiced grace, topping off wine glasses, shaking hands, leaning in with that magnetic smile. He laughed easily, but it was the kind of laugh that came from calculation, not joy. Every joke, every anecdote was tailored to keep the spotlight squarely on him. The house was his stage, and the people here were his audience. And then there was Chloe. If Michael was the conductor of tonight's performance, Chloe was the centerpiece. A stunning soloist everyone couldn't help but watch. She was 29, with the kind of beauty that turned heads even in a room full of designer dresses. Long legs, glossy chestnut hair, skin like porcelain under the warm glow of the chandeliers. Her red silk dress clung to her like it had been sewn directly onto her body, the slit at her thigh revealing just enough to keep eyes lingering. Chloe knew exactly how to use that attention. She laughed at Michael's jokes a beat louder than necessary, touched his arm or shoulder at every opportunity, and leaned in close when he spoke as if every word he said was gospel. She wasn't just his companion tonight. She was part of the brand he was selling. The image of success, youth, and desirability. The truth, of course, was far less glamorous. Chloe had started as a marketing assistant in Michael's company 2 years ago, fresh out of grad school with a degree in communications and a resume full of internships at boutique firms. She was ambitious, too ambitious for the slow climb up the corporate ladder. She'd found her shortcut in Michael. At first, it was harmless enough. Late nights, working in his office, long lunches under the guise of brainstorming sessions. Then came the gifts: jewelry, handbags, a new car. Always accompanied by whispered promises about a future that didn't exist yet. By the time Michael moved her into the Price house, Chloe was no longer an employee. She was the queen of his social calendar. The woman on his arm at every event, the one redecorating rooms that still held Samantha's touch. Chloe liked power almost as much as Michael did. And tonight, she wore it like a second skin. From her vantage point near the fireplace, Samantha could see the dynamic between them clearly. Michael was the sun in Chloe's universe. Or at least, that's how he wanted it to look. But Samantha knew that Chloe wasn't orbiting him out of devotion. She was there for the same reason Michael had been drawn to her in the beginning: opportunity. Michael's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment," he called, raising his glass. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward him. Chloe slipped an arm through his, resting her other hand on his chest. "As most of you know," Michael began, "this home has been the heart of so many wonderful memories for me. Tonight, I'm honored to share it with friends, colleagues, and the people who've helped make Price Development what it is today." There was polite applause. "And," he continued, flashing a smile at Chloe, "I'm especially grateful to have someone by my side who has brought new energy, new inspiration, and frankly, a new sense of style to this old place." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Chloe's eyes sparkled as she tilted her head toward him, basking in the attention. Samantha stood silently by the edge of the crowd, her coat draped over her arm, the manila folder still in her bag. She didn't need to say anything yet. Let him talk. Let him show everyone exactly how pleased he was with himself. Michael launched into a story about a recent deal, a luxury condo project in the city, embellishing the details until the victory sounded almost mythical. He gestured with his free hand, name-dropping investors, dropping figures that made the guests nod in admiration. But Samantha noticed the little cracks. The way his smile tightened when one of the investors asked about project delays. The faint shadow under his eyes from nights spent juggling debts he hadn't told anyone about. The way Chloe's hand lingered a little too long on her champagne glass, as if she were reminding herself she was still part of the picture. When the toast ended, Chloe took the opportunity to glide toward the dining room, where a few women had gathered. Samantha caught snippets of her voice, talking about the ex-wife, with a note of pity that was almost convincing. Almost. She left ages ago, Chloe was saying. Honestly, it was better for everyone. Michael deserved someone who could really keep up with him. The women nodded, their expressions a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. Samantha didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Michael, meanwhile, was moving toward the study, the room Samantha had converted into a reading nook when they first bought the house. Through the open door, she saw the rich mahogany desk, the leather chair, the built-in shelves lined with books he'd probably never read. It was here that Michael had signed the contracts for their first joint property investment. It was also here, she knew, that he'd entertained Chloe long before the divorce was finalized. Michael thrived in rooms like this, private, powerful, a place where deals were made. But tonight, the study was just another prop in his performance. He leaned against the desk, speaking in low tones to a man Samantha recognized as his lawyer. There was a flash of irritation on Michael's face before he smoothed it over with that practiced charm. Watching him now, Samantha realized something important. Michael had built his entire persona on the belief that he was untouchable, that no one could outmaneuver him, that charm, money, and a willing partner on his arm could erase any wrong he'd done. He didn't just see Samantha as an ex-wife. He saw her as irrelevant, forgotten, a footnote in the story of his rise. And that was exactly why tonight would hit him harder than he ever imagined. Chloe rejoined him by the study door, her hand slipping into his. They exchanged a quick conspiratorial smile before heading back toward the living room. Michael's arm went around her waist, pulling her close, as if to prove a point to anyone watching. It was almost funny, Samantha thought, how sure they both looked, how convinced they were that this was their kingdom, their audience, their stage. They had no idea the curtain was about to fall. The moment hung heavy in the air, as if the walls themselves were bracing for impact. Samantha stood near the center of the living room now, the hum of conversation reduced to a faint buzz behind the sharp pulse in her ears. Every eye in the room seemed fixed on her. Michael, ever the performer, stepped forward with a polished smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Samantha," he said in a tone that was meant to sound welcoming, "why don't we take this outside? We can talk privately." She didn't move. "Why would I do that? You invited all of them," she gestured to the room to watch this performance. "Seems only fair they see the ending." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Chloe, still perched at Michael's side, tilted her head in mock concern. "Michael, maybe she's not feeling well. Pregnancy can make people a little emotional." Samantha's gaze slid to Chloe, cool and steady. "Oh, I'm feeling just fine, and I'm not here to talk about emotions. I'm here to talk about business." Her hand dipped into her bag. She pulled out the manila folder and set it squarely on the glass coffee table, directly between the champagne tower and a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres. The sharp snap of the clasp echoed in the quiet room. Michael's jaw tightened. "What is this?" "Your notice to vacate," Samantha said, her voice even. "You have 72 hours to remove yourself, your belongings, and anyone else who doesn't belong here." The words landed like a punch. Several guests exchanged wide-eyed glances. One man actually choked on his champagne. Chloe let out a short laugh. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" "Oh, I can?" Samantha interrupted. "Michael violated 3 separate clauses in the settlement agreement. The mortgage is behind. The property's been used for business without my consent. And," she let her gaze sweep the room deliberately, "you've turned it into an entertainment venue for people who have no idea they're drinking champagne in a house you don't legally control." The silence was deafening. Michael took a slow step toward her, his voice dropping to a warning growl. "You're making a mistake, Sam." Samantha didn't flinch. The mistake was thinking you could do whatever you wanted without consequences. From the corner of the room, an older man in a tailored suit spoke up, one of Michael's investors. "Is this true? You don't own the property?" Michael's face reddened. "This is not the time or the place." "It's exactly the time and place," Samantha said, her voice cutting through his. "You built your reputation on appearances, Michael. Maybe it's time everyone sees the truth." Chloe shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the guests as if willing them to side with her. "This is pathetic," she spat. "You're just jealous." Samantha's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Of what? A man who can't keep his debts paid or his promises kept." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Michael's mask cracked then. The smile vanished, replaced by a scowl that exposed the edge beneath all his charm. "You're doing this because you're bitter," he said, his voice sharp. "You couldn't keep up with me, and now you want to ruin me." Samantha stepped closer, her belly brushing the edge of the coffee table. "No, Michael. I'm doing this because you forgot who you were dealing with." For a long beat, no one spoke. Then a woman near the back, someone Samantha recognized from past charity events, cleared her throat. "I think it's time we go," she said to her companion. They left quickly, their departure triggering a slow exodus, as others suddenly remembered pressing engagements. The remaining guests hovered awkwardly, torn between morbid curiosity and the instinct to flee. Samantha turned to leave, but Michael's voice stopped her. "If you walk out now, I'll fight this in court. I'll drag it out for months." She glanced over her shoulder, her expression almost amused. "Then I'll see you there. But in the meantime, the sheriff will be here on Friday to change the locks. Your choice whether you walk out with dignity or get escorted." Michael's fists clenched at his sides. Chloe muttered something under her breath. Samantha caught the word witch. But neither of them moved. Without another word, Samantha walked toward the front door. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, each step a reminder that she was in control now. She paused only once at the threshold, turning back to face the room. "Enjoy the party," she said, her tone almost light. "It's your last one here." She stepped into the cool night air, the muffled sound of whispers spilling from the house behind her. As she reached the gate, she exhaled slowly, her pulse finally beginning to steady. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she'd taken something back. Not just the house, but a part of herself Michael had tried to erase. Inside, she knew, the party would crumble. The guests would leave. Michael and Chloe would argue. And word of tonight's scene would travel faster than any press release. By morning, the image Michael had worked so hard to cultivate would have a fracture running right through it. And that was just the beginning. By the time Samantha reached her car, the rush of adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation began to drain from her body. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel. For a moment, she didn't start the engine. She just sat there, staring at the glowing windows of the house in the rearview mirror, listening to her own shallow breathing. It had been the right thing to do. She told herself that over and over. Michael had broken the rules. The house was hers by law. But right now, with her heart pounding and her baby shifting restlessly inside her, the certainty she'd felt only minutes ago began to blur. What if she'd gone too far? She could picture it already. Michael's phone calls to his lawyer, the headlines if he decided to spin the story in the press, the smug way Chloe would talk about the crazy ex-wife who stormed their party. She knew Michael. He wouldn't lick his wounds quietly. He'd fight, and he'd try to hurt her in the process. Her throat tightened. She leaned forward, resting her forehead on the cool leather of the steering wheel. For a brief, terrifying moment, she wished she'd just stayed home. Wished she hadn't walked into that house, hadn't felt every eye on her, hadn't put herself in the middle of a public scene. She hated herself for thinking it. But the thought was there, all the same. When she finally started the car, her fingers still shook on the ignition. The street was quiet as she pulled away, the tires crunching over gravel. The farther she drove, the more the night seemed to close in on her. By the time she reached her small apartment, the adrenaline had faded completely, leaving only exhaustion. She let herself in and shut the door, locking it out of habit. The The silence inside felt different from the silence at the Price house. Here, it wasn't cold or staged, but tonight, it wasn't comforting either. She kicked off her shoes and sank onto the couch, staring at the darkened TV screen. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. One glance at the screen told her it was her attorney. She let it ring out. She couldn't talk right now. Not about legal paperwork, not about next steps. She just wanted quiet. But quiet made room for the doubts to crawl in. She thought about the look on Michael's face when she'd handed him the eviction notice, that flash of panic before he'd masked it with anger. For a split second, she'd felt powerful. But now, alone in the dim light of her apartment, she wondered what would happen if that power slipped away. What if he contested the eviction? What if the judge sided with him? What if she just turned her life into a months-long battle she wasn't strong enough to fight? Her hand instinctively went to her belly. The baby kicked, a small flutter under her palm. It brought a sting to her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm trying to do the right thing for us." She thought about her mother, who had always told her that standing up for yourself wasn't easy, that it often came with loneliness. Back then, Samantha had nodded, believing she understood, but she hadn't, not until now. A tear slipped down her cheek, hot and fast. She didn't bother to wipe it away. Another followed, and soon she was folded over, sobbing into her hands. She cried for the years she'd spent believing Michael's lies, for the home she'd built with love, only to have it turned into a stage for his ego, for the fear that maybe, even now, she wasn't strong enough to face him. The sobs came in waves, leaving her drained. She finally leaned back against the couch, her breathing ragged. The apartment was still quiet, but the stillness no longer felt oppressive. It was just empty. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from her attorney. "Call me tomorrow. We'll prepare for pushback." "Don't worry." She set the phone down without replying. She couldn't think about pushback tonight. Instead, she let her gaze wander to the framed photo on the bookshelf, one of the few things she'd taken from the house. It was from the early days before the wedding, when she and Michael had gone hiking in the mountains. She was smiling at the camera, cheeks flushed, hair messy from the wind. Michael's arm was around her, but he wasn't looking at the lens. He was looking at her. It hurt to see that picture now. But it also reminded her that there had been a time before him, and there would be a time after. Eventually, she stood and made her way to the bedroom. She changed into a soft cotton nightgown, brushed her teeth mechanically, and crawled into bed. Sleep didn't come quickly. Her mind kept replaying the confrontation in the living room, the gasps, the whispers, the way Michael's face had shifted from arrogance to anger. When she did drift off, her dreams were restless. She woke just after dawn, heart racing, the taste of fear still on her tongue. The morning light filtered weakly through the blinds. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Michael had already started plotting his retaliation. Of course he had. That was who he was. A part of her wanted to crawl under the covers and hide, but another part, quieter, steadier, told her she couldn't. She'd made her move. Now she had to see it through. Still, as she pushed herself up and swung her legs over the side of the bed, she felt the heaviness settle back into her bones. Today would bring calls from her attorney, maybe even a formal response from Michael's lawyer. And she'd have to keep her composure, even if she felt like she was coming apart at the seams. She shuffled to the kitchen, made tea, and stood at the window, watching the street outside. Life was moving on out there. People walking dogs, kids riding bikes, as if nothing had happened. But for Samantha, everything had. She sipped her tea slowly, letting the warmth steady her hands. She wasn't ready yet. Not to fight. Not to face him again. But she would be. Just not today. 2 days after the confrontation, Samantha sat in her attorney's office, a sleek corner suite with glass walls that overlooked the city. The skyline glimmered in the morning light, but her attention was fixed on the thick stack of documents spread out on the desk between them. Across from her, Lauren Hayes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a reputation for dismantling arrogant men in court, tapped a pen against the top page. "Michael's lawyer sent this over late last night. They're contesting the eviction." Samantha had expected it. Of course they are. Lauren's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. They also included an offer to resolve the matter amicably. She slid a single sheet across the desk. Samantha scanned it. It was laughable. A half-hearted proposal that would let Michael stay in the house for another year, while paying a reduced rate on the mortgage, all under the pretense of avoiding unnecessary legal conflict. She looked up. "He thinks I'm desperate enough to agree to this." "He thinks you don't have the resources to fight him," Lauren said, her tone dry. "Which, of course, is where he's wrong." Samantha leaned back in her chair, the faintest glint in her eye. "He has no idea, does he? Not unless you've told him." She shook her head. "Michael always assumed I was just scraping by. He never once asked about my work after the divorce, probably because he thought it was nothing important." Lauren sat forward. "Then it's time we use that to our advantage." For the past year, Samantha had been quietly building something Michael knew nothing about. When she'd left the marriage, she hadn't just taken her clothes and a few personal belongings. She'd taken her skill, the eye for design that had once made her clients line up for her attention, and poured it into her own business. It had started small, consulting for boutique hotels on their interiors, helping young families design warm, functional homes. But word had spread quickly, and Samantha had landed 2 major contracts with developers in the city. Her designs were now featured in architectural magazines, and her bank account, once frighteningly low, was comfortably in the 7 figures. And she hadn't stopped there. Using the settlement money Michael had so smugly assumed would barely last her a year, she'd made quiet investments, in real estate, in a small but promising tech startup run by a friend from college. Every move was calculated, every dollar placed with care. She'd kept it all off Michael's radar on purpose. The less he knew, the better. Lauren flipped open another folder and slid it toward her. Inside was a formal notice of funds, a declaration that Samantha had more than enough capital to buy out the remaining mortgage in full, pay all court fees, and still have a sizable cushion left over. "Once we file this," Lauren said, "it changes the dynamic completely. He can't paint you as a broke ex-wife trying to cause trouble. He'll see that you can outspend him in this fight and win." Samantha ran her fingers over the page, feeling the smooth weight of the paper. "He's going to hate this." "Good," Lauren said simply. "Men like Michael only respect power, and right now, you have it." As Samantha left the office that day, the city seemed sharper, brighter. She walked with a confidence she hadn't felt in years, the kind that came from knowing the truth was on her side. And now, the resources were too. She stopped by a small cafe on the way home, ordering a latte and settling into a corner table with her notebook. As she sipped, she began sketching ideas, not for a client, but for herself. She pictured the house after Michael was gone, the rooms stripped of his pretentious decor, the warmth she'd put back into them, the nursery she'd once dreamed of filling. But it wasn't just about reclaiming a property, it was about reclaiming her place in the story. Michael had tried to write her out, to reduce her to a cautionary tale whispered about at dinner parties. Now she'd be the one turning the page. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it, and her breath caught. "You think you've won? This isn't over." No signature, but she didn't need one. Michael's voice came through in every word, that mix of arrogance and threat he'd perfected over the years. She stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back a simple reply. "Neither is mine." That evening, she sat at her dining table, papers spread out in front of her. Bank statements, investment reports, the signed contract from her largest client, worth more than Michael's last development deal. She thought about how little he'd ever valued her skills, how quick he'd been to dismiss her work as a hobby. Let him see now. The next morning, she met Lauren again to finalize their next move. They would not only reject Michael's counteroffer, but file a motion for expedited possession, backed by proof that Samantha could take on the mortgage herself without delay. It was aggressive, decisive, exactly what Michael wouldn't expect. When the paperwork was ready, Samantha signed it with a steady hand. Her signature looked different now than it had a year ago. Stronger, more certain. As she walked out of the courthouse later that week, she caught her reflection in the glass doors. A woman standing tall, her shoulders squared, her expression calm. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, she wasn't just reacting to Michael's moves. She was making her own. And she had no intention of losing. The day after filing the expedited possession motion, Samantha stood in front of her bedroom mirror and barely recognized herself. It wasn't that she'd suddenly become someone else. The hazel eyes were still hers, the curve of her jaw, the faint scar on her chin from a childhood fall. But there was a different energy now, a steadiness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. She thought of all the times Michael had looked at her like she was an accessory. Nice to have on his arm, pleasant to look at, but never the main event. That woman was gone. It started with the smallest choices. She got her hair trimmed into a sharper, more modern cut, the kind that framed her face and made her eyes stand out. She traded the comfortable neutral clothes she'd been wearing for tailored pieces that felt like armor. A navy blazer with clean lines, dresses that skimmed her growing belly but still looked commanding, low heels that clicked with authority. She didn't need to hide the fact that she was pregnant. She needed people to see it, to see that she was building a life and taking back her power at the same time. Her transformation wasn't just about appearance. She began her mornings differently, starting with a run walk in the park, breathing in the cold air until her head felt clear. She ate better, cooked meals that nourished her, instead of grabbing whatever was easy. And she kept working, not just because her business demanded it, but because it reminded her of what she'd built without Michael's help. Her assistant, Jenna, noticed the change almost immediately. "You are different," she said one morning as Samantha breezed into the office. "In a good way, I hope," Samantha replied, hanging her coat on the rack. "In a powerful way," Jenna said, grinning. "Like, don't mess with me energy." Samantha smiled. That was exactly what she wanted. Lauren, too, picked up on it. During their next meeting, she leaned back in her chair and studied Samantha for a moment before saying, "You're ready for this. I can see it." "I am," Samantha said, "and I want him to see it too." That chance came sooner than expected. A week later, she was invited to a gala hosted by one of her hotel clients. Normally, she would have declined. She wasn't interested in small talk and champagne flutes, but she knew Michael would be there. He never missed an event where real estate money was in the room. The night of the gala, Samantha dressed with intention. A deep emerald gown that fit her perfectly, a sleek updo, diamond studs she'd bought for herself after landing her first major contract. She walked into the ballroom and felt the shift immediately. Heads turned, conversations paused. She wasn't the ex-wife people whispered about anymore. She was someone they wanted to know, and then she saw him. Michael was near the bar, holding a glass of scotch, Chloe on his arm in another dangerously low-cut dress. He looked the same, expensive suit, polished smile, but there was a tightness around his eyes. He'd heard about the motion they'd filed. When he spotted her, his smile faltered for just a second. It was enough. Samantha didn't approach him. She let him watch her move through the room, greeting people, laughing easily, speaking with the hotel owners who were among her biggest clients. She wanted him to see her surrounded by allies, to understand that she wasn't isolated anymore. At one point, she caught him looking at her while Chloe pretended to check her phone. He raised his glass slightly in mock salute. She gave him a polite nod, nothing more, and turned back to her conversation. That night, when she got home, she stood in her kitchen with a cup of tea and thought about how far she'd come since the night she'd stormed into the house with eviction papers. Back then, she'd been running on anger and adrenaline. Now she was standing on solid ground. Her transformation wasn't about proving something to Michael anymore. It was about proving it to herself. Still, she knew the final step was coming. The moment she would walk back into that house, not as the woman he'd left behind, but as the one who now held all the cards. And she wanted that moment to be unforgettable. She began planning for it in quiet, meticulous detail. Not just the legal logistics, but the optics. Who would be there, how it would happen, what she would say. She called Lauren. "When we serve the final order, I want it delivered in person," she said. Lauren's voice was steady. "You're sure?" "Yes," Samantha said. "I want him to look me in the eye when he realizes it's over." In the days that followed, Samantha prepared like she was going into battle. She reviewed the order until she could recite the key points from memory. She rehearsed her words in front of the mirror, making sure they came out calm and sharp. She didn't want shouting or drama. She wanted precision. She also made a few calls to people she knew would make Michael sweat. A well-known property investor who'd once considered partnering with him, a journalist who specialized in real estate scandals. Not to tip them off directly, but to invite them to a housewarming she would host once the property was back in her possession. Word would spread, as it always did. By the time Friday arrived, the day the sheriff would change the locks, Samantha was ready. She dressed in a fitted black coat over a cream sweater dress, hair down, makeup flawless. She carried nothing but her bag and the final notice. Driving toward the house, she felt no tremor in her hands this time, no racing pulse, just focus. The transformation was complete. The sun was just starting to set when Samantha pulled up to the Price house. The porch lights were already on, casting a golden glow over the white columns. It looked warm, inviting, exactly the kind of illusion Michael loved to maintain. She could hear the hum of voices from the driveway. Through the front windows, she spotted movement. Guests milling about, glasses in hand. Of course, he'd be hosting something tonight. Michael never missed a chance to put on a show, even when the stage was about to collapse under him. Samantha stepped out of her car, heels clicking against the pavement, her black coat flaring slightly in the cool breeze. She crossed the lawn with measured steps, her eyes fixed on the door. When she rang the bell, it was Chloe who answered. The smile that flickered across her lips was smug and thin. "Oh," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Back again? You must really miss this place." Samantha's voice was calm. "I'm here for Michael." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "He's busy." "Not for long." Before Chloe could respond, Michael's voice rang out from inside. "Who is it?" Chloe didn't answer, but Samantha stepped forward into the light. "It's me." A moment later, Michael appeared in the foyer, wearing another one of his tailored suits. The instant he saw the envelope in her hand, his expression hardened. "You've got some nerve showing up here again." Samantha smiled faintly. "And you've got 72 hours fewer than the last time I was here." Michael glanced at the guests behind him. Investors, colleagues, acquaintances from the real estate world. "We're in the middle of something," he said through clenched teeth. "Perfect," Samantha replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Then everyone can witness this." She walked to the center of the living room, setting her bag down on the coffee table. Conversations died instantly. All eyes were on her. She could feel the tension thickening in the air. "This," she said, holding up the envelope, "is the court's order for possession of this property, effective immediately. The locks will be changed within the hour." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Michael's face flushed red. "This is harassment. You can't." "I can," Samantha said, cutting him off. "And I have. You violated the settlement agreement in 3 separate ways. You ignored notices, you let the mortgage slide, and you used the property for business without my consent. The court agrees. This house is mine again." One of the guests, a tall man in a navy suit, spoke up. "Is that true, Michael?" Michael didn't answer. His silence was all the confirmation anyone needed. Chloe crossed her arms, trying to look unaffected. "So what? You think walking in here and embarrassing him makes you the winner?" Samantha's eyes flicked to her. "No, reclaiming what's mine makes me the winner. This," she gestured to the room, "is just a bonus." The sheriff's deputy chose that moment to arrive, stepping in through the open door. He held a set of documents in one hand and a locksmith's kit in the other. "Evening," he said politely. "We're here to execute the order." Michael spun toward him. "You can't just—" The deputy's voice was firm but professional. "Court order says we can, sir. You'll have time to collect personal belongings, but the property changes possession tonight." A stunned silence filled the room. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. A few slipped toward the door, eager to avoid being part of the fallout. Samantha stepped closer to Michael, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You could have made this simple. You could have left with dignity. But you chose this." Michael's jaw worked as if he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. His eyes burned with a mix of anger and something else, something that looked suspiciously like fear. Samantha straightened and addressed the deputy. "I'll give them a few minutes." She picked up her bag and walked to the porch, the crisp evening air hitting her cheeks. From outside, she could hear the muffled chaos. Chloe demanding to know what they would do now, Michael muttering curses. drawers opening and slamming shut. She didn't need to see it. She knew exactly what was happening. The collapse of a man who had built his life on a foundation of arrogance and assumption. 10 minutes later, the deputy stepped out to signal that the locksmith was starting. Samantha walked back in, the sound of tools clicking against the front door filling the air. Michael was standing near the staircase, a duffel bag at his feet. Chloe was nowhere to be seen. "This isn't over," he said as she passed him. Samantha stopped, turning just enough to meet his gaze. "Yes, it is." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The finality in her tone was enough. As the locksmith finished, the deputy handed her the new keys. She closed her fingers around them, feeling their solid weight. For the first time in months, she let herself smile. Not a sharp, defiant smile, but a genuine one. When Michael and Chloe finally walked out, the deputy closed the door behind them. The house was quiet again, empty. Samantha walked through each room slowly, taking it in. The pretentious decor was still there, but it didn't matter. It was hers again, and she would make it her own once more. In the foyer, she paused and looked toward the door, imagining the faces of the guests as they left, the whispers that would spread, the reputations that would shift. Michael had been publicly stripped of something he valued more than money, his image. That was the real revenge. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of the Price house. No, her house, in a way it hadn't in years. It was softer now, less filtered through the haze of staged perfection, and more like it had been when she first moved in. Samantha stood barefoot in the foyer, sipping her coffee, listening to the quiet. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace. There was still so much to do. The furniture needed replacing. The walls needed fresh paint. The lingering scent of Michael's expensive cologne would take time to fade. But none of that mattered. The victory wasn't in the decor. It was in the fact that she had taken this place back. As she walked through the rooms, she imagined the changes she'd make. The cold, gray dining room would be warm and welcoming again. The sterile living room would have soft couches and blankets, a place for friends to gather. And upstairs, the master bedroom would become hers in a way it had never been before. Not shared, not compromised, just hers. She paused in the smaller bedroom at the end of the hall, the one that had once been a guest room. It would be the nursery now. She ran her fingers along the empty windowsill, picturing curtains swaying in the breeze, a crib in the corner, a rocking chair by the wall. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby's small, steady movements. "We're home," she whispered. Later that day, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, drafting an email to her clients. It wasn't about business exactly, more like a message to let them know she was stepping into a new chapter. She wrote about change, about not being afraid to take back what's yours, about the strength that comes from refusing to be erased. She didn't name Michael. She didn't need to. When she hit send, she leaned back in her chair and thought about the road that had brought her here. The nights of doubt, the mornings when she didn't know if she could fight anymore, the weight of fear and the ache of betrayal. And then the shift. The moment she realized she wasn't just surviving, she was winning. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Lauren. "Congratulations again. You did it." Samantha smiled as she typed back. "We did it." In the days that followed, word spread about what had happened. At first, it was whispers in real estate circles. Stories of Michael Price being locked out of his own home, guests watching as the eviction unfolded. Then it became wider. An unflattering mention in an industry blog, a pointed comment at a networking event. His image was dented now, and in his world, that was a deeper wound than losing a house. Samantha didn't seek those stories out, but when they found her, she didn't shy away from them either. She wasn't ashamed of what she'd done. She had followed the law, stood her ground, and refused to let someone take from her again. One afternoon, Jenna stopped by with flowers and a bottle of sparkling cider. "For the housewarming," she said, grinning. They sat in the living room, the coffee table now cleared of its pretentious champagne tower and toasted to new beginnings. "You know," Jenna said, "you could turn this whole thing into a book, or a podcast, or something. People need to hear it." Samantha laughed. "Maybe one day." That night, after Jenna left, Samantha curled up on the couch with a blanket and let herself finally exhale. She thought about the other women out there, the ones who had been made to feel small, invisible, replaceable. She wanted them to know what she had learned, that you don't have to shout to be heard, and you don't have to break someone to win. You just have to know your worth and refuse to let it go. In her mind, she could still see Michael's face when the deputy handed her the keys. The anger, the disbelief, the realization that the game was over and she had won. But that moment wasn't the ending. It was just the turning point. The real victory was here, in the quiet, in the life she was building that had nothing to do with him. She rose from the couch, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. In the nursery, she opened the window and let the evening air in. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, kids laughed, and the world kept moving forward. So would she. Standing there, she thought of the words her mother had told her years ago. You can lose almost everything and still win, as long as you don't lose yourself. Samantha smiled. She had lost a marriage. Yes, she had lost time and trust, but she hadn't lost herself. She'd found herself, stronger, wiser, unshakable. As she turned to leave the room, she whispered to the baby again, "We're gonna be okay, better than okay." And she believed it. So the story has ended, my wonderful friends. And if you're still here until now, it means something in this journey has touched your heart. Remember, as an old heterodox saying goes, sometimes losing what you thought you needed is the only way to find who you truly are. Life will test you, but your worth is never decided by those who try to diminish it. If this story gave you strength or hope, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can find their own courage. And drop a comment below telling us your thoughts, because your voice matters here.